We're very lucky to have as our featured speaker Dr. Anjan Chakravarty. He grew up in Canada. He has his bachelor's in biophysics and a master's in philosophy from the University of Toronto, and then from the University of Cambridge. He has a master's in philosophy from that, as well as a PhD. More recently, a grant was made to the University of Miami for a chair, and a chair in university parlance means an endowed position for which there are specific funds, usually for a kind of specific purpose. A chair for the study of atheism, humanism, and secular ethics. So we're very, very pleased to have him speak to us. He's very thoughtful, and I believe you're going to enjoy the presentation.
Thank you, Carrie. As Carrie mentioned, I'm a philosopher. More specifically, I'm a philosopher of science. So before I do anything else, I thought it might be helpful to take just a moment to say something about what philosophy is and what I do, since it doesn't tend to be a profession that most people are familiar with from day-to-day experience. Some of you will know this already, of course, because you took a philosophy course once. Perhaps it was a dreaded intro course in your freshman year. Philosophy is the study of the most basic principles and assumptions that underlie and inform just about everything we believe. So, for example, you might think that a particular governor is doing something good or bad, perhaps. But if you ever stop for a moment to think more carefully about what it means to act well or badly, right? What goodness, what badness is exactly, well, then you're doing philosophy. In fact, you're doing moral philosophy. Or perhaps you think that democracy is the best form of government there is. Mm-hmm. If you were to step back from this claim and think about it more deeply, what is it exactly that we want from a system of government? How do the different possible systems of government compare in those ways? Well, if you do that, then you're doing philosophy. In this case, you're doing political philosophy. So, as you've now correctly guessed, you can do philosophy in connection with almost anything. And as I mentioned, I'm a philosopher of science. I spend my days thinking and writing and teaching about the basic assumptions that go into producing scientific knowledge and how we should understand that knowledge. Now, why is that of interest to you? It's a long-standing part of the traditions of humanism and free thought to advocate the use of science and reason. We all aspire to goals like leading an ethical life, working toward the common good. But to bring these things about, we need to act. And to act, we need information, and we need to use that information wisely. Hence, science and reason. What I want to talk to you about today is really all about the question of how the sciences can help us in just the ways you think it should, right? Or at least I want to focus today on one important aspect of that question. Today, I'm going to focus on the relationship between science and values. And by values, I mean ethical and social values. So let's dig in. Now, I can just see your puzzled faces already, right? What on earth do values have to do with science? You might well think, and this is a very popular idea, that the reason we should rely on science as a source of guidance for how to act for the common good is precisely because it's neutral with respect to values. It's all about facts, right? And facts and values are very different sorts of things. Of course, there are certainly ways in which having certain values can lead to interference with science, right? There are plenty of examples of that, right? Many of which may come to mind, or that I'm sure you could think of if you stop to reflect on it for a moment. So for example, consider how tobacco companies in the last century funded misleading studies to convince people that secondhand smoke isn't actually harmful. Or consider more recent attempts to undermine climate science through misleading presentations of it. For a great book by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway, which discusses, among other things, the tobacco industry and climate denialism. These are cases where certain kinds of values are interfering with science, right? Either by corrupting the work at the source, right? By effectively paying for the results, as in the case of tobacco companies, or by misrepresenting the work, as in the case of climate science deniers. They aren't cases where values are playing a role in genuine science as such. Mm. Rather, here, it's usually straightforwardly understood by the people who are doing the corrupting and the misrepresenting of science that they're up to no good, right? I mean, that's the point. They're trying to twist things in order to serve an agenda other than the truth, right? An agenda like making money or consolidating power or whatever. So in these sorts of cases where it's transparent, even or especially to the people who are behaving badly, that their values are leading them to pervert scientific knowledge in some way, right? These cases are extremely important for obvious reasons. But I'm going to set them aside today, right? Today I want to talk about something that's actually more subtle. It turns out that even in cases when we're doing our best, right, where we're not, or not consciously at least, trying to mess things up by corrupting and misleading, even when we're all trying to do good, values are involved in producing scientific knowledge. And it isn't just the values that sort of wander into scientific work by accident, right? I mean, that definitely happens. But it's also the case that it isn't even possible to separate our values from science, even if we do it as carefully as it can be done and we tell the truth about it. So even though it's very natural to think that matters of fact, on the one hand, and matters of value, on the other hand, are totally different sorts of things, it turns out that they're closely connected to one another. So in the time I have today, I'm going to talk about 3 ways in which the sciences are not, it turns out, even possibly neutral with respect to values after all. And if that's so, and if we want to have science that's going to serve the purposes that humanists and free thinkers want it to serve, well, then we'd better make sure that our best values are part of it.
So we have a question from Anita.
So I had a question regarding values and different values. You sort of began this talk about how we should consider our humanist values in scientific inquiry. There's also the fact that science is a global endeavor where you have value systems that are different around the world that are informing the research. So how do you create a value system that is going to bring together, or a universal value system, a value system that all these scientists agree upon?
Great questions. By the way, these have all been great questions. How do we establish a kind of universal value system? Well, to a certain extent, that happens because there is internationally a kind of, ranking system, official or unofficial, of journals, right? If your work conforms to standards that are judged to represent the best possible science, you're more likely to get published in these journals. If your work is really terrible, you're not going to get published in any of those journals, you're going to get published somewhere else. So, informally, there are kind of international systems through which people can sift, if they're involved in this kind of edifice, really good work from perhaps less good. The problem is that, of course, these systems are never ideal. So that's why the kinds of things that I was suggesting earlier, like really having peer review function as a genuine check on research that's happening, making sure that the community of inquirers is diverse. There's never going to be a universal system in the sense that everybody abides by it, because even within a country, even within a lab, right? I mean, you may have someone that decides that they're going to do something fraudulent. And so people flout the systems all the time. And so really it's a question of, can we develop oversight and checking procedures such that we can make sure that our best standards are enforced? And I think people try to do that to a certain extent. It exists. Could it be better? Yes. I think that's an ongoing project.
So we have a question from Jim.
Who decides on the funding? When you talk about malaria, when you talk about Southeast Asia, especially Southeast Asia, there's a lot of money in that region. If the governments actually cared about their people and these particular contagions, why aren't they paying for the underlying research for cures, prevention, etc.? Is it our responsibility, ours, the first world, to fund all research?
Okay. The idea that our pharmaceutical and biomedical remedies structures are designed in such a way as to favor the profit motive, as you said. I think that's absolutely right. I think that the question as to who bears responsibility for redressing the balance, right? There are millions of people that are dying of diseases of poverty. Who's responsible for that? Is a really thorny question. It's not that governments in countries where diseases of poverty are most prevalent, in particular tropical countries, do not bear responsibility. It's also the case that they typically are not anywhere near among the wealthiest countries in the world. And so when you're comparing issues of responsibility and also issues of the ability to contribute to such efforts, right? There are various factors that need to come into play. The question of who bears responsibility and what portion of responsibility should be borne by whom is, I think, an excellent question. And it's obviously not one that I'm in a position to answer now. We do have international organizations, in part because I think many people believe that we do have a kind of duty to the planet. So it's not just America first, all and only, right? But that we might have duties that extend to people beyond national boundaries. But these are thorny questions that need to be discussed and debated, and I'm not suggesting an answer here.
Okay, so we can give a nice big applause here. Love it. That was fabulous.